She was standing by the window in an emerald green gown, her natural coils rising around her face like a crown she was born wearing, gold earrings catching the light of a chandelier that cost more than most people's yearly salary. And he walked straight toward her like she was something he could simply reach out and take. Richard Calloway III, $12 billion. His name on the building, his money on the tables, his hand on her arm. She told him to remove it. He laughed. She was a black woman, alone for a moment in a room full of people who looked through her like she was decoration. And this man, this untouchable, this bull of Beverly Hills who had never once in 54 years been told no in any way that mattered, laughed. But what he didn't know, what nobody in that glittering, chandelier-lit room knew, was that 30 feet away, a door had just opened. And the man who walked through it didn't look at the lights, or the crowd, or the city sparkling beyond the windows. He looked across 300 feet of polished floor and found her in under 3 seconds. And then he saw the hand. What happened next, the 30 centimeters, the silence that made a billionaire's blood run cold, the 2 words that dismantled a man's entire hidden empire without a single threat being spoken, changed everything. Richard Calloway III thought he knew about power. He came into that room as the most powerful man in it. He left 47 minutes early and spent the next 3 weeks quietly tearing apart his own empire, in silence, hoping no one would notice. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There is a particular kind of man who has never once in his life walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. Richard Calloway III was that kind of man. He had been that kind of man since the age of 11, when his father first brought him to a board meeting and sat him at the table. Not in the corner, not in an observer's chair, but at the table, and told him to watch how the men in the room deferred to the Calloway name before a single word about money had been spoken. That was the lesson. Not finance, not strategy. The lesson was that a name, if built correctly, arrives in a room before the body does and rearranges the furniture of everyone else's expectations. By 54, Richard Calloway had spent 4 decades perfecting that arrangement. The gala that evening was his. His conception, his funding, his guest list, his venue. The cause was oncological research, which was a fine cause, though the primary function of the event, as with every event Richard organized, was the invisible one, the circulation of proximity. Who stood near whom? Who received the longer handshake? Who caught his eye from across the room and felt the specific warmth of being seen by someone who had the power to make warmth mean something? He had walked the room 3 times before 10 o'clock, which was his habit. Not to socialize, to inventory. It was on the second pass that he saw her. She stood near the east window, where the light from the chandeliers caught the gold of her earrings and the deep green of her gown in a way that made her difficult to ignore and nearly impossible to look away from. Her hair rose around her face in full, dense coils that she wore the way certain women wear things, not as a choice made for the room, but as a fact about herself that the room was simply required to accommodate. She held the champagne flute that she had not drunk from. She had the posture of someone who was comfortable standing alone. Richard Calloway had a particular response to women who seemed comfortable standing alone. He read it as an invitation. He had always read it that way. In 40 years, no one had ever corrected him. He crossed the room. What happened in the next 10 minutes was not, from the outside, visibly dramatic. There were no raised voices, there was no scene. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like a man introducing himself to a woman at a party, which is one of the most ordinary things that happens at parties. From the inside, it was something else entirely. He said her name wrong after she corrected him once. He asked where she was from in the tone that means he expected the answer to explain something he was already assuming. He made a comment about her hair, loose and gestural, the kind of comment that is designed to sound like observation, but functions as a small, precise reduction. And then he put his hand on her arm in the way that men who have never been stopped do. Not as aggression, but as reflex, the automatic assumption of access. She told him to remove it. He laughed. She told him again. And it was in that second, in the laughter that followed the first request and the silence that followed the second, that the evening shifted in a direction Richard Calloway III did not yet have the instruments to detect. Because at that exact moment, on the far side of the ballroom, a door had opened, and a man in a black suit had stepped through it. He did not look at the chandeliers. He did not look at the crowd, or the tables, or the city visible through the tall windows behind the bar. He looked across 300 feet of polished floor and found, in under 3 seconds, the only thing in the room he had come to find. And then he saw the hand. There is a particular kind of walk that has nothing to do with speed. It is not fast. It does not announce itself. It does not part the crowd through aggression or volume, or any of the mechanisms that men who need to be seen use to move through spaces. It parts the crowd the way pressure parts water. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because the bodies in the room register something at a frequency below conscious thought and respond to it before the mind has time to form a reason. Kwon Jae-won crossed the ballroom in that walk. People stepped aside without knowing they had stepped aside. Conversations continued, glasses were raised, laughter moved through clusters of guests, and in the middle of all of it, a corridor opened, naturally and without ceremony, and he moved through it without acknowledging that it existed. He stopped at 30 centimeters, not at a polite distance, not at the distance of introduction or confrontation, or any of the social geometries that govern how bodies relate to each other in rooms like this one. 30 centimeters is the distance at which the air of one person enters the breathing space of another. It is the distance at which the body cannot pretend that nothing is happening, even when the face is trying very hard to pretend exactly that. He said nothing. This was the detail that Richard Calloway III was entirely unprepared for. In Richard's experience, power announced itself. It had to. Power was, in his understanding, fundamentally a communicative act. The suit, the watch, the room you walked into, the name that arrived before you did, the tone of voice that carried the specific frequency of a man who had never been told no in any register that mattered. Power spoke first. Power set the terms of a conversation by speaking first, and the conversation then organized itself around those terms. The man in front of him did not speak first. He simply stood at 30 centimeters and looked at Richard Calloway with eyes that were so dark and so entirely still that they did not read as a gaze so much as a condition, like weather, like depth, like the specific quality of silence that exists at the bottom of something with no bottom. Richard's hand had left Amara's arm. He had not decided to move it. It had moved. He became aware of his own breathing in a way that he had not been aware of it since he was a child. He became aware of the specific weight of the Audemars Piguet on his wrist, which had always felt like an extension of his authority, and now felt like a costume piece. He became aware that the crowd around them had not stopped moving, had not formed a circle, had not marked the moment in any visible way, and that this somehow made it worse, because there was no audience to perform for, and no performance would have helped him anyway. He opened his mouth. He said the only thing men like him know how to say when the familiar architecture of their power has stopped working. He said his own name. He said it the way it had always functioned, as a key, as a credential, as the thing you produce when a door is not opening the way it should. Richard Calloway, the third. As if the numeral itself carried additional weight. The man at 30 centimeters let the name land in the air between them. And then, without any change in expression, without any shift in the quality of that stillness, he said what he knew. Not a threat, a recitation. Clean and precise, and delivered in the same tone a physician uses when reading results that have already been determined. Informational, almost gentle. The kindness of someone who believes you deserve to understand what is happening to you, even if you cannot change it. The assets, the investigations, the archipelago of offshore accounts that Richard had spent years making technically invisible. And then, at the end, 2 words. Grand Cayman. Delivered not as accusation, but as coordinate, as proof of something larger, as the corner of a map that implied all the territory Richard had believed no one else could see. The blood left Richard Calloway's face in a way he could feel. He heard himself say, "How did you?" And the man at 30 centimeters simply waited for him to finish the sentence, knowing he wouldn't, knowing that Richard already understood that the question had no answer that would help him, that the answer itself was the point. That someone knew, that knowing had been effortless, that the knowing was not the end of anything, but merely the surface of something that went considerably deeper. Amada stood slightly behind and to the left, her clutch in her hand, her posture unchanged. She had seen men deliver difficult diagnoses before. This was not entirely different. There is a specific moment in the collapse of a powerful man that is almost invisible to everyone, except the people who have been waiting for it. It does not look like collapse. It looks like composure. It looks like a man straightening his jacket, recalibrating his expression, reaching for the social mechanisms that have served him for 5 decades and arranging them back into position with the practiced efficiency of someone who has survived difficult rooms before. The jaw firms, the shoulders settle. The eyes find a neutral point slightly above the eye line of the person they cannot bring themselves to look at directly. Richard Calloway III did all of these things in approximately 4 seconds. And then he said the second thing men like him say when the first thing hasn't worked. He asked if there was somewhere they could speak privately. The man at 30 centimeters looked at him for a moment that lasted considerably longer than its actual duration. Then he took 1 step back, a single, unhurried step that restored the conventional distance between 2 men at a party, and said, with the same quiet that had characterized everything he had done since entering the room, that there was nothing left to discuss privately. He said it the way you close a door, not with force, with finality. Richard Calloway nodded. Once. The nod of a man who is translating a situation he does not fully understand into terms he can carry out of the room without losing what remains of his dignity. Then he said something about enjoying the rest of the evening. The sentence came out slightly wrong, the syntax slightly displaced, the automatic social phrase arriving half a second late, and landing with the particular hollowness of words spoken by a mouth that is running on habit while the mind is doing something else entirely. He turned. He walked toward the bar, then past it, then past the cluster of guests who called his name with the warmth of people who still believed they were at Richard Calloway's party. Because they were. Because nothing visible had changed. Because the chandeliers were still throwing their fractured light across the room, and the string quartet was still threading music through the air, and the city was still glittering beyond the tall windows in all its indifferent grandeur. He kept walking. At 21:10, Richard Calloway III left his own gala 47 minutes before it ended. His car was waiting. He got in. The door closed behind him with the soft, pressurized sound of expensive engineering, the sound of a world designed to be seamless and insulated, and exactly as controlled as the man inside it needed it to be. He sat in the back seat and looked through the tinted window at Beverly Hills moving past him in its usual careful beauty. And he felt, in the specific silence of that car, something that his body recognized immediately, even though his mind had not encountered it in so long that it had nearly forgotten the shape of it. He felt small. Not humiliated. Not angry. Not strategizing, which was what he usually did in cars after difficult evenings, turning the sequence of events over in his mind and identifying the adjustments to be made and the calls to place in the morning. He felt simply, cleanly, and completely small, in the way that a man feels small when he has encountered something that exists entirely outside the system by which he has always measured size. He called his head of security. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. He asked for a profile on Kwon Chae-won, and in the pause that followed, 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than any pause his head of security had ever given him. He understood before the answer came that the answer was going to rearrange something. It did. He listened. He did not speak again until the call was over. When it was over, he sat with the phone in his hand and looked at nothing in particular, and thought about Grand Cayman, which was a place he had visited 11 times, and which he had believed, with the absolute confidence of a man whose lawyers were very good and very expensive, was invisible. Someone had seen it effortlessly, had held the information without using it until the precise moment it was most useful, and had then produced it not as a weapon but as a demonstration, the way a man might place a single chess piece on the table beside the board to indicate that he has already seen the next 14 moves, and is simply offering you the opportunity to concede without the embarrassment of playing them out. Back in the ballroom, the string quartet moved into something slow and luminous. Amara Osei accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing tray, touched the rim of it lightly to Chae-won's glass, and turned back to the conversation she had been having with a pediatric researcher from Johns Hopkins before the evening had briefly become something else. She did not look toward the door through which Richard Calloway had left. She had already stopped thinking about him. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a man home. Not the silence of an empty house or a quiet street, or the specific hush that falls over a city at 3 a.m. when even the traffic has thinned to something occasional and distant. This is a different silence. It is the silence of a question that has no answer the asker is willing to live with, circling the interior of a man's mind with the patient, unhurried movement of something that knows it does not need to rush because it has already arrived and has nowhere else to be. Richard Calloway III did not sleep that night. He sat in the study of his Bel Air residence, a room lined with the kind of books that are purchased in sets for their spines and the credibility of their arrangement, and he thought about 30 centimeters. He thought about the specific quality of those eyes at that distance, the way they had held him without holding anything, without heat or hatred or any of the emotional weather that he knew how to navigate because he had spent a lifetime learning to read emotional weather and find the pressure points within it. There had been no pressure point. There had been only stillness, and the information produced from within that stillness, and the 30 centimeters, and then the single step back that had ended it, so completely that he had not understood it was over until he was already walking toward the bar. He called his legal team at 7 the following morning. He did not explain why. He asked for a full audit of every international holding, every partnership structure, every subsidiary relationship that touched anything connected to Asian import and export markets. His lead attorney, who had worked with Richard for 19 years and had learned to ask very few questions, asked one anyway. Whether there was a specific exposure they were looking to address. Richard said he wanted everything clean. The attorney said everything was already clean. Richard said he wanted it cleaner. It took 11 days. At the end of those 11 days, 2 contracts were quietly dissolved, 3 partnership agreements were restructured, and a set of documents related to a holding entity registered in Grand Cayman were revised in ways that cost Richard Calloway approximately $4 million, and which his legal team unanimously considered unnecessary. He did not explain the decision to anyone. He did not need to explain it. He had spent 54 years building a world in which his decisions did not require explanation, which had always felt like freedom, and now felt, in the particular way that things reveal their true nature in retrospect, like a habit. The habit of a man who had arranged every room he entered so that no one would ever ask him to account for himself. Because accounting for himself had never been required. Because the rooms had always been his. One room had not been his. 3 weeks after the gala, a donation arrived at the pediatric oncology department of the hospital where Amara Osei completed her residency. It was anonymous. It was significant. It was the first anonymous donation Richard Calloway had made in 22 years of charitable giving, which was itself a kind of confession. The admission, made in the only language available to a man like him, that something had happened which he did not want attached to his name. No one at the hospital connected it to him. Amara did not know about it at all. She was in her 4th hour of a Tuesday shift when it arrived, sitting on the floor of a corridor outside a room where a 7-year-old was sleeping through her 2nd round of treatment, eating crackers from a small paper sleeve because she had forgotten, again, to eat a real meal. Reading something on her phone with the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who has learned to find stillness wherever she is placed. Chae-won had sent her a message that morning. 3 words, in Korean, which translated roughly to something between, I saw you, and I see you. The difference being that one is a moment, and the other is a continuous fact. And he had chosen the phrasing that meant the latter. She had read it on the way into the hospital and had not responded yet because she was thinking about how to say, in any language, that she understood the difference too. That evening, in the apartment that had begun to hold both of their silences comfortably, she told him about the 7-year-old, about the 2nd round, about the crackers in the corridor. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without the restlessness that most people carry when they are waiting for their turn to speak. And when she finished, he asked about the child's name, and then asked 2 more questions that told her he had been paying attention not just to the words, but to the weight behind them. Outside, Seoul arranged itself in its vast and luminous geometry against the night. She thought about what it meant to be known by someone, in a world that had spent considerable energy trying to reduce her to something smaller than she was. She thought about the gala, and the man in the white tuxedo, and the 10 minutes that had briefly made her the object of someone else's careless certainty. She thought about 30 centimeters, and the particular quality of a silence that does not need to explain itself. She thought about what Chae-won had said in the car. I needed to. Not I had to. Not it was necessary. Those would have been the words of obligation, of role, of a man performing the function assigned to him by the world he inhabited. I needed to was something else. It was the language of a man who had found, late and unexpectedly, and with the full weight of someone who had not been looking for it. The specific thing that made him want to be accountable to something beyond himself. She picked up her phone. She typed 3 words back, in Korean, which she had spent 8 months learning because he murmured things in it when he was almost asleep, and she had wanted to understand. The words meant, roughly, "I know that." But in Korean, as in most languages that have been used long enough to develop their subtleties, the phrase carried a secondary meaning that the literal translation did not capture. Something closer to, "I have always known that. I was waiting for you to know it too." He read it. He did not respond for several minutes. When he did, it was not with words. He sent her, instead, a photograph, taken from the window of wherever he was at that moment, of the city below, lights scattered across the dark in their indifferent and luminous abundance. Beautiful the way things are beautiful when they are not trying to be, when they simply are what they are, and the night receives them without condition. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put her phone in her pocket, stood up from the corridor floor, straightened her coat, and walked back through the door to where the work was. Behind her, the corridor was empty and quietly lit. Somewhere in Bel Air, a man sat in a room full of books he had never read, in a silence he did not know how to fill, thinking about 30 centimeters. And in a pediatric ward that smelled of antiseptic and something underneath it that was harder to name. Something that had to do with the specific courage of small people fighting large things. Amara Ose knocked twice on a door, waited for the small voice on the other side of it to answer, and went in. Amara Ose knew something that many women are still discovering. Taking care of yourself isn't vanity. It's practice. It's ritual. It's the daily choice to honor who you are. And if you also want to build this brighter version of yourself, with the wisdom of a culture that takes care seriously, I've prepared something especially for women like her. Like you. The Korean Glass Skin Secrets for Black Queens 45+ guide is available now, featuring a complete AM and PM routine, the 15 Korean ingredients that truly work on mature black skin, and 3 bonuses: a hair ritual, an at-home spa, and 12 teas to glow from within. The link is in the description, in the pinned comment, or scan the QR code that's appearing on the screen now. You don't need anyone else's skin. You need the best version of yours. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked straight through you, underestimated you, touched something of yours without permission, simply because they believed their power made them untouchable? And have you ever witnessed or experienced the quiet and devastating moment when someone stood 30 centimeters from that certainty and shattered it without raising their voice? And for those of you who have ever loved someone enough to walk across a room for them, not because they needed saving, but simply because your heart could not stay on the other side of it, tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, protection, and the kind of love that makes people want to be better, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.